And I think we'll get started. We have so much to talk about today. I can see so many friends entering the audience, getting themselves comfortable. I'm Sharon Avery. I'm so proud to be a part of this organization, the Toronto Foundation, an organization committed to creating a sense of community for our very large and complex city. And happy to be here today for the second in our three-part series, a webinar focused on 4 scalable ideas for action now. Our Fallout report came out a few weeks ago, the first time Toronto Foundation has done a report that's essentially focused on 7 months of data. 7 very hard months for this city and for its residents, and a lot harder for our racialized neighbors than others. And I'm really tried to make this report not pull any punches on that issue, but I think you can't change things that you can't face. And so really proud of the work the team has done and excited about this conversation today, because this report is not valuable if it is not actionable. And I think we can get really frankly depressed about the numbers. The data shows a very stark picture of this city and the inequality that exists. But today we're here to talk about action and innovation and creativity and the kind of work that can come out of a global pandemic when we're forced to do things differently. And so I'm hoping that this will be a very positive conversation ultimately, and I'm really excited about it. We will be sharing some links in the chat, and we invite you to participate in the chat as well. This is a webinar, but it isn't a one-way conversation. We have some brilliant panelists here today, but we also invite you to speak up and introduce yourselves. If there's a question in the chat that you have an expertise in and know the answer, I know I have a lot of great org leaders in this audience today, please feel free to answer it. Please feel free to send a link to more information. Please feel free to connect. That is what this is all about. So one of the themes that really stood out in our report, but is worth repeating and feeds into today's discussion, is that in our last discussion, our panelists really talked about the fact that it gets really comfortable to fall into old patterns. And but what our panelists in our last webinar emphasizes that we can keep talking about what we want, but unless we change our approaches, right now we are doomed to fall back into old patterns. And I think we all agree that we've learned a lot of positive things through COVID, and we don't want to give them up. I think we've learned that change is possible, and I think but we have to hold on to that by transforming ourselves in the way we do things. So this is something we've been thinking about a lot, and we've gathered these 5 panelists today to talk more about their ideas. I've mentioned many times to this group that we are Toronto Foundation, and our focus is on small, medium-sized organizations who are supporting and holding up communities across the city. And I think this work is more important than ever. Today, we've gathered 3 other voices, or 4 other voices really, to add to this discussion about building back better. And also today, at the end of our formal discussion, you'll be able to connect with some of our fund holders. Priya Veer, Paul Nagpal, along with Ravi Jain, Executive Director of Why Not Theatre, are going to hold an informal discussion starting at 9 o'clock that anyone who can stay is welcome to join, talking about their new giving circle. And there's nothing better in philanthropy than giving in community and for community. Before we get into the discussion itself, I really need to thank Van City Community Investment Bank. They offered early support through COVID and supported our Better Toronto Coalition work, and more recently sponsored this Fallout report. And with resources so tight across the sector, their support and sponsorship has been critical. It's also absolutely critical that I acknowledge where we are today. We are so grateful to be working in a community that has been an active community for millennia, our Indigenous neighbors and friends and colleagues from the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and most recently the First Nations, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. This is their community, and we are grateful to be there with them. Toronto is home to 70,000 diverse Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. Our work in that community is very important to us. In the last session, Lindsay Kretschmer was here, and she's the executive director of the Toronto Aboriginal Support Services Council. She's recently done an op-ed in the Toronto Star, and I think we're going to share it in the chat if you haven't had a chance to read it. Lindsay and her organization are dear friends with Toronto Foundation. We have a strong relationship, but I think her words speak to the kind of new relationship we need to be building as funders and as partners. So we've got a very tight agenda this morning. I got to get down to business. I'm going to stop going off my script and focus on this brave and bold conversation we're going to have this morning. You know, there's a lot of power and privilege in frankly, philanthropy. And I think it's time for us to start challenging that. And sometimes that can make for challenging conversations. And I'm so glad you're all here and up for that today. I ask that we keep this a safe and respectful environment, and keep in mind your responses in chat are public. And I know we can create a brave space together in our conversations today. So let's get right into it with our panelists. We've given them a challenge off the top, which is to speak for a minute. And I'm going to introduce each panelist individually, ask them to answer a single question, and get so that you have a chance to know them. And Jeanny, I'm going to start with. For over 25 years, Jeanhy Shim has been a real estate development consultant. As head of her own consultancy, the Housing Lab Toronto, she is currently working on several of her own initiatives to promote more affordable housing, more friendly housing, family-friendly housing, and more child-friendly cities. In 1 minute or less, Jeanny, can you share a story that captures the impact of your work, or a story that captures the need for your work?
Thanks, Sharon. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeanhy Shim. We are just getting started. We are setting up a new not-for-profit development company called Crosswalk Communities. And our goal is to build affordable rental housing that's rent geared to income, using healthy wood modular housing, construction techniques, and also providing on-site wraparound social supports like childcare, mental health and wellness, a whole bunch of other things. So why is this important? I probably don't need to go through the big list that everyone here probably already knows about. Over 100,000 people on the waiting list in Toronto alone for affordable housing. The COVID crisis, the Toronto Foundation report just gave statistics behind what we already know and problems that we've had in our city of a lot of people struggling, who are working hard but struggling just to have a roof over their head, to put food on the table. I saw some statistics this summer, Sharon, about over 1,000 families and children living in our shelter system in Toronto. A woman who worked at Children's Aid Society for 30 years did a look at their files, and 1 in 5 children who were in Children's Aid were there because of housing related issues. So all of these are just statistics, try to put kind of faces to these issues that we're facing. So I come from the private sector. I've got a bunch of colleagues who also have a lot of private sector experience who've decided to come together to set up this not-for-profit development company to address the rent geared to income end of affordable housing. The private sector is incentivized by the city right now to deliver affordable housing as part of development in our city, but they're really targeting kind of that upper end of affordable housing, if I can even use that term. So that's essentially what we're doing. And I think the reasons why we need it is that COVID has just, shone a spotlight on it even more.
Thank you, Jeanny. Well done. Only well done on the timing. I'm not, my timing's already off. So well done to you. And thank you for that. I think many of our donors and fund holders are very keen to understand how to step into the housing space. It seems quite daunting. It seems almost impossible. And thank you. I'm looking forward to learning more. So now let's meet Tesfai Mengesha. Tesfai, did I get that right? Say it for me.
Tesfai Mengesha.
Thank you. Tesfai Mengesha. Thank you. He's the executive director, operations at Success Beyond Limits. This is a not-for-profit based in the Jane and Finch community of Toronto that reimagines education and its of possibility. He is particularly passionate about addressing the persistent opportunity gap in education for young people whose educational needs have traditionally not been met. Tesfai, you know the question. Can you share in 1 minute or less a story that captures the impact of your work or the need for your work?
All right, thank you, Sharon, and hi, everyone. When I was thinking about this question, I was thinking about my own personal education journey as an educator, but also in the nonprofit sector, as I paralleled it as well with a student that I've known for a very long time. I think back at my time when I graduated from teacher education program, which was many years ago, and really it was June, and then in July, literally a couple of weeks later, I was teaching my first class with Success Beyond Limits in its first summer. And I still remember a student from that time. And I remember as an educator making the decision to transition into the nonprofit space, but still working within the education sector with Success Beyond Limits. And in my first year, there was a student who was a part of our summer program in grade 8, where she got an advanced high school credit before she got to high school. And then when she journeyed off to grade 9, she started her high school journey. And at that time, she had been placed in the academic stream. And what that means for that student is as they go through high school and they graduate, their options are limited in terms of their education pathways of what they can do after high school. So at that time, she decided in grade 9, after going through our program, really understanding how education pathways work, that was not the right fit for her in terms of what she wanted to do in the future. And so she went to the guidance counselors in our school and advocated for herself and said, I want to switch to the academic stream. At the time, they said, no, we feel like, applied is the best place for you. And so, of course, she came to SBL and we talked about it. And because she was a part of our summer program, we were able to go to guidance and really speak to the work that she was able to accomplish. And many of our staff are teachers themselves. And so when we did that sort of advocacy, they have then allowed her to switch the academic stream. Fast forward 4 years later, in grade 12, she's graduating. And as she's making her decision as to the post-secondary institutions she's applying to, she wanted to become a teacher. So she had applied to several post-secondary institutions. And the one that she wanted to go to was a direct entry program. She was actually denied admissions. At the time, she was really down, and we had a conversation around, have you thought about maybe looking at alternative options, maybe looking at an appeals process? At the time, we weren't even aware if there was one. And so she on her own contacted the institution to find out why her admission was declined. Come to find out, it had nothing to do necessarily with her marks, but it was the fact that she was not admitted into her primary program, which was English. And without that primary admission, because the decision hadn't come down yet, they could not admit her into the teacher education program. And so through the appeal process, because that took some time, by that time she had already been admitted into her English program, and they reversed it, right? And so she was able to get into the teacher education program, and we've been able to support her since. And today she's a teacher, and we have great conversations around our own teaching philosophy and our approaches to teaching. So I wanted to share that story because I think it shares kind of the deep-rooted relationships we have with young people and the longitudinal nature of those types of relationships.
I love it, but boy, it shouldn't be so hard for a bright young woman to become a teacher. And I think that's the other side of this challenge. And I'm so glad you're there, but I wish you didn't have to be there for that kind of fight. Thank you, Tesfai. Next up, I want to introduce, this is our first ever husband and wife panelists. I hope this is gonna work. Candace and Dwayne Dixon, about 10 years ago, co-founded Sugarcane, a boutique Caribbean carnival costume design and production company that is based in Toronto, but also does business internationally. Since 2017, Sugarcane has been incubated by the Design Fabrication Zone, DFZ, at Ryerson University, where Candace and Dwayne have focused on exploring advanced digital fabrication techniques in costume making. And I think it's important just to highlight, we haven't actually talked about the arts and culture community as much as yet as we need to through COVID. and how it has been decimated by the pandemic. And so particular call out to Candace and Dwayne for being here today and being the voice of a really important aspect of quality of life in the city on that front as well. So you know the drill, 1 minute or less, a story that captures the impact of your work or a story that captures the need for your work. Candace and Dwayne.
Thank you for having us here, Sharon. Hello, everyone. Yes, arts and culture is very integral to the city and integral to what we do with our work. Working with the Design Fabrication Zone for the past 3 years, 4 years now, has been a huge part of pushing forward the mandate and educating the masses as to what carnival culture is and what it is that we do and why we do it. What we do stems from oppression and it's a celebration of our freedom, and that's something that is core to everything that we do through sugarcane, but as carnival as a culture. And we want to make sure that that is something that is put out into the forefront. When it comes to a story that really, for me personally, showed the impact, growing up, it was hard to see people who looked like you in high positions. So we had an opportunity to do a photo shoot with Now Magazine. We got the cover story. We had a beautiful project called the Inkwell Project, incorporating 3D printing and laser cutting into costume design. And we actually had the photo shoot set at Dufferin Station. If you know anything about Caravan and Toronto Carnival, getting down there by car is not the best option. Dufferin Station is where you're going to see masses of people in beautiful costumes, in revelry, and just really enjoying who they are and their culture. And so this was a set of the photo shoot. So we had our models all dressed up. We're on the ground platform at Dufferin Station, and a group of young children, Black children from a summer camp dressed up in yellow t-shirts came into Dufferin Station, and they saw the models and they were just like, whoa, that's amazing. And they looked up and they're like, are you from Wakanda? And if you know what Wakanda is the fictional land in Black Panther. So they looked at them, they saw superheroes, and our models looked at each other and they both did the Black Panther cross of their arms across the chest. And the kids are like, they're from Wakanda, as they're going down the stairs in Dufferin Station, it was amazing to see them see themselves as superheroes. So when I say impact, I don't know what that moment did for those little children, but I know that for myself, it was we're doing the right thing and we're on the right path. Dwayne?
Yeah, well said, well said. Yeah, for me, it really came to fruition in terms of impact was when we went to Trinidad. So Trinidad is the mother of Caribbean Carnival. It was founded there and it spread globally, including Toronto for the last 53 years. Now, in 2018-19, we said, let's start really focusing in and blowing the roof off innovation when it comes to Carnival, as we've already been doing advanced fabrication and technology. So we came up with this virtual reality, the first virtual reality Carnival experience. And there was an event called Cara Festa that is a biannual event. Every 2 years it happens across the CARICOM. So think an Olympic-styled event for the artists and the artisans in one particular Caribbean nation every 2 years. So in that year it was Trinidad. And we went down with a group of Canadians, Canadian artists, a contingent of Canadian artists, about 30 to 50 of us. And for us, we were the only, Carnival designers. Now, everyone I think knows the saying, bringing sand to the beach. Well, us being Caribbean Carnival producers from Canada, going to Trinidad, we were kind of nervous on what the reception would be. It was a 10-day event. We had our own vendor booth, and this is where we would debut our virtual reality experience. So day one, Candace and I were very, very nervous. We're setting up shop. Word is starting to get out that, we have something special. And when we opened up, I want to say 9 a.m. day one, by 10 a.m. day one, there was a lineup around the booth that went all the way outside. And that continued, I kid you not, for 10 days with only the two of us manning about 10,000 people daily in the space that we were in. And obviously we couldn't see 10,000 people a day, but we were exhausted. when we showed the virtual reality experience, people who were questioning Canada, Canada, what Canada know about Caribbean culture and things of that nature. And when they saw the virtual reality experience, they could not believe it. We were getting offers for people to, wanting to buy our costumes right away. How can they get this and take it home? And to our surprise, we also became ambassadors for Canada, as many, many people wanted to know how they can get a passport, a visa to come into Canada. So we understood that, from the work we're doing, trying to bridge and close that age gap and bring new technologies in, we're not only uniting people locally, but globally. And that was done from 2 Canadians.
Wow. I have so many thoughts in my mind. I was in a session the other day where they were talking about revitalizing a park in Brooklyn. And in the park, it's called Lion's Pride, and it had an incredible old steel drum shaped like a lion. And the lengths to which New York City's team had gone to try and find the original designer, and the amount of pride that came with that steel drum. Of course, he's Trinidadian, and they tracked him down. And but just the complexity of the layering of the Trinidadian heritage, the Canadian identity, for better or for worse, right? We are not a perfect country. I'm so intrigued, and thank you for sharing that story. And both of you for lighting us up this morning. I think I've got the Caravana spirit already, and I needed it at 8 a.m. this morning. So last but not least, I want to introduce Jeffrey Schiffer. Jeffrey J. Schiffer has Métis and German ancestry and was born and raised in unceded Coast Salish territory in what is today Vancouver, British Columbia. He is currently the Executive Director of Native Child and Family Services of Toronto and co-chairs the City of Toronto's Aboriginal Affairs Committee. Jeffrey, you've got this.
Thank you, Sharon. Good morning, everyone. Really happy to be here with you all in Circle this morning. An amazing story. So, we heard an acknowledgement, a land acknowledgement at the beginning of our conversation this morning. Canada is a country of treaties, right? It was a country where there was an initial promise to co-create something together between settlers and Indigenous people. And, that promise really has been broken countless times. I just want to talk a little bit about how police emerged in Canada initially as an institution to really forcibly, move Indigenous people onto reserve and to remove Indigenous children and place them in residential schools. And, that history of systemic racism still continues to shape policing in the present. There was a report that came out in July that said of the last 100 people that were shot to death by police in Canada, the majority of those were Indigenous, right? And despite the best intentions of so many police officers and so many police services across the country to change that, we still see Indigenous people overrepresented in violence and sexual exploitation and fatalities at the hands of police, right? Data is showing us that interactions with Indigenous and Black people that are related to mental health and substance abuse and family violence remain the most problematic, the most difficult for police to manage. And at the same time, we know from multiple jurisdictions that community-led organizations are set up for success in managing these same interactions and doing so in a way that spend less money, achieve better outcomes, and actually free up police to deal with the certain things that we know that they do really well. So in the context of this pandemic, we have an opportunity for change. We have an opportunity to do things differently. We have an opportunity to save lives. And I really firmly think that time for change is now. And we at Native Child and Family Services look forward to being a part of that. Miigwech.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm a big fan of your organization and the work that you do. I'm going to ask the team to go to a video that we've created, and then I'm going to come back, and I'm just, for the sake of our panelists, I'm going to combine all of the questions and just sort of intensify our Q&A period and go to video now. So this is a video about a young woman named Sharon. I think it's appropriate to tell Sharon's story after hearing what Jeffrey just had to say. She is being supported by nonprofits in the city, and we're where is my introduction? There she is. this is a voice of it, Shaylin is important because she's an Indigenous woman, and she's currently being supported by Miswee Aboriginal Employment and Training. And this is her and her neighborhood. We're going to talk about the importance of our neighborhoods and why each of our organizations are focusing in on particular neighborhoods in the city. I want her to share her experience of her life during COVID-19 before we go there.
So I was in the field of policing, and I took 2 years of that, and I realized like it's not for me. The thing that caught my eye was the carpentry apprenticeship, and then George Brown shut down, right? My biggest challenge through the whole impact of the COVID-19 was just being stuck in this shoebox up in the sky, right? Which is your condo little unit that you only have like a little space of the balcony, not going back home, not seeing your family, not seeing your loved ones, your nieces, your nephews, your friends, even going seeing my partner's parents too, because they're getting to that age that you want to spend more time with, right? Constantly on social media, the televisions, like talking about the COVID and other issues, not just the COVID too, but other issues that also came up as a Indigenous person that came up in Nova Scotia, the pipeline, the Black Lives Matter too came up, and that's just definitely impacted my health, mental health issues too. It's just trying to cope with that. I am keeping myself busy, more like going for my like morning walks when no one's out, right? So you have the space to yourself, taking everything off your mind, and plus being healthy. Stop watching the news, stop going on like Facebook or Instagram or looking up the news apps and stuff like that. Just more focus on myself and my well-being. With even Ms. Beek, they definitely helped me with that well-being too, because of being busy with school and distracting me, right? They found something, this trade school. Yeah, and I just ended up doing home renovation, finished that course, graduated last month. Now I'm into the plumber pre-apprenticeship program now, so I'm in it right now. After I'm done this program of plumbing, am I gonna get a job? It's like, are you willing to go back out there and put yourself out there with the little experience you got? Is just for a company to grab you and take you. Yeah, that's definitely a challenge for me, but I'm taking one step at a time to see how it goes.
So I'm going to ask all our panelists to take themselves off mute so we can have a shared discussion now. And I want to start with this question, and I welcome anyone to jump in with the first answer. For each of you is focused on a particular neighborhood or community. Tell us why that part of the city or particular community is the starting place for your work. Who'd like to go first?
I'll jump
Is
in,
that
Sharon,
Jeanny?
quickly. Yep,
Yeah.
I can
Yeah,
jump
go
in
ahead,
quickly with
Jeanny.
an answer. I grew up in Rexdale in the northwestern part of our city. It's a wonderful neighborhood, and there's lots of neighborhoods like Rexdale, Jane and Finch, Malvern, places that get a bad rap, but they're actually wonderful neighborhoods. And, you know, I'm in my 50s now, so it's been quite a while since I grew up there, but I still have roots there. And that's where I'm hoping just to be able to do our first, you know, and geared to income affordable housing development in Rexdale. But really, we're looking anywhere in the city. You know, we don't need affordable housing is needed everywhere. But I guess Rexdale is just a personal place that I'd love to see us do some development, but certainly looking in any of our high priority neighborhoods in particular.
Wonderful. Tesfai, how about you?
Yeah, I think my story also is parallels Jeanny's in terms of, you know, work in a community where I grew up in, and really it's my own personal education experiences and journeys that inform my work. So I have had the privilege of attending schools within my community and outside my community, and I've seen the vast difference in educational experiences. And so that really grounds my work when I'm working in my particular community in the Northwest in Jane and Finch, because it informs it so that we can structure education in ways that work for young people. And I think it's really important to understand the differences that occur in terms of the local complexities and local challenges, because they are different in different communities, even though, you know, the education system, there's one school board across Toronto. So that's the reason. And also it's reflected in not just my experience, but also all of our staff. You know, all of our staff have grown up in the local community and really understand the local dynamics, because I think that's important to be able to do your work effectively.
We would agree. I think it's vital. What do we know? And what have you lived, right? Dwayne, Jeffrey, Candace?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So we focus mainly on the community aspect. So, you know, growing up in a marginalized community as a young person, knowing I wanted to get into the arts, there was barriers to access. And there still is barriers to access, you know, in terms of pathways for those who identify themselves as artists and really want to go in that pathway. Oftentimes, we're forced to be put into these boxes or follow a pathway that closely resembles what we're looking for, but it actually isn't what we're looking for. So being part of the first generation born in Canada to Caribbean parentage, parents, we recognize that for carnival, it's very hard for someone who hasn't grown up around it to get involved. How does one get involved? So we focus on the youth aspect. We focus on young people in terms of how do they find a pathway to education, learning these skills that are transferable, and at the end of the day, get paid to do what you're doing. And just for the record, you know, the Toronto Caribbean Carnival has a huge economic impact of over a couple of millions of dollars, right? So, you know, there's this disconnect between the economic impact and the learning and the pathway for these artisans and people who want to be involved in a formal way in terms of arts and culture, and specifically the Caribbean arts and culture community.
I think for us, you know, we've been working on this, you know, mental health response pilot with the Indigenous Affairs Office and the Police Reform Unit at the City of Toronto. We knew that we needed to start small and, you know, create something that was evidence-based and had good outcomes before we could scale it up. And for us, with, you know, everything that's been happening after George Floyd, there's been a real solidarity between Black and Indigenous folks around continued police violence. And we've been working in Scarborough for a long time. Our largest site there is at Kingston and Galloway, our Scarborough Child and Family Life Center. And many of the families that we support in that area are Black and Indigenous, right? You'll have an Anishinaabe mom and a Jamaican dad or something like that, right? And that particular population has a lot of challenges in their interactions with police. And so we've also been talking with Division 42 and Division 43 of the Toronto Police Service about work in that area. We think it's an area where we could really demonstrate the effectiveness of a model very quickly, and then demonstrate its scalability for other areas in the city. Yeah.
Scale is a thing, and scaling these ideas is a question that I have. But before I get to that, I'd like to know what has been the key factor or catalyst that allowed your idea to take off in the first place, because each of you have very unique models and ideas. And I'm wondering, maybe Candace, because we haven't heard from you yet in this round, you could start with this question of you know, how long did it take to get your idea off the ground, and what was the catalyst for you guys?
I would say for us, in terms of being able to engage with youth, it's been technology. It's really been speaking to them in their language, right? So a lot of the things that we found, the elders in our community are saying that youth aren't taking up these tenets. How do we get them involved in this work if we can't speak to them, right? And if we don't speak to them when the elders are gone, who's taking up and continuing this work? So for us, it was really technology and finding a way to engage young people. So speaking to them in their language, working with these advanced fabrication methods, but applying them to traditional forms of costume design and giving them the background as to why we do this in the first place, the knowledge behind it, the fact that, you know, this derives from slavery, and it was a protest. It was a protest to be involved in taking place and taking up space and showing up in environments that you weren't welcome in. So we really use technology as the force behind being able to get these works and this information out there. A lot of our designs have the education behind it. So we have, you know, these beautiful wings with laser cut panels out of birch wood, but it says the words like emancipation and liberation and freedom etched into wood, into a carnival costume. So really it's technology in these materials that we're playing around with, the virtual reality that we're playing around with, that is engaging people outside of the carnival community, saying, what are you doing 3D printing? That's interesting. Now we can tell you the story.
That's amazing. And I wonder if it's a natural segue to Tesfai in terms of the youth, but also the innovation. Go ahead, Tesfai.
Yeah, I'll talk a bit about our origin story, and it may make others as well. I mean, our organization really started out of a local community meeting in the local high school, and it brought community members together, but it also brought together educators in the local community and those also from the local university, which is York. And we were just talking about really what we were seeing in the education sector, and particularly in our high school, looking at things around graduation rates, looking at all kind of the education metrics that were really important. And we wanted to do something about it because they were so alarming. And so like many community meetings, it kind of spilled over in the parking lot, and we really continued that conversation with a much smaller group. But from the inception of the work that we do, we've always had community at the forefront. But what was really important is that we had supporters that were within these large institutions that we were looking to transform. So we had the buy-in from the local school board and then also from the local university, and really built an education organization that was looking to transform education, but doing it with people that are already inside the institution, but focusing on community as the catalyst and at the forefront of driving what we're looking to do, and not the large institutions we're working with.
Jeannie, Jeffrey, what do you have to add to this conversation about catalysts?
I think, you know, for us, I mean, we started as a support service agency long before we took on a child welfare mandate. In '92, our Mukayem healing clinic started. And so we sort of had our fingers on the pulse of mental health in the, you know, Toronto Indigenous community for decades. And when COVID started, it was became acutely aware to us that people were struggling, right? Many of the face-to-face services that people relied on a daily basis were evaporating. And though we were developing many virtual services, home is not a safe place for many people at the best of time. And so we started reaching out to community, doing surveys, talking to folk. And one of the things that we found through conversations with community was that things were getting more challenging for folks around mental health and substance abuse and family violence. And a lot of our community members didn't feel safe calling the police to resolve those issues. And so for us, that started a conversation about how we work with the city and other partners to create an alternate phone line, an alternate service to be able to meet the needs of community, not only within the context of COVID, but I think beyond. Yeah. So it was really community driven for us. Yeah.
Jeannie?
Sharon, I mean, for us, I mean, like I said, I work in the private sector world in city building, real estate development. And for me, COVID, as we know, has really shone a spotlight on how our city is not very resilient when it comes to a large segment of our population. And you know, the governments for decades have downloaded the responsibility of building affordable housing onto the private sector. Well, the reality is the private sector is for profit. And that's why we have these massive waiting lists. And that's why we're not delivering solutions fast enough, as much as governments will pass more legislation to compel private sector developers to build affordable housing. So for me, really, COVID just became kind of and then also, you know, all the murder of George Floyd, a lot of these kind of issues are, a lot of it, you know, kind of one of the potential, you know, things that can really help is affordable housing. So people, you know, have a roof over their head. We know that that is really so critical to have that stability, that security. And, you know, somebody working in a minimum wage job, they should be able to access affordable housing, something that they feel that they can access with dignity, something that they can afford. So the catalyst is really that. And what's happened, Sharon, I think, is because of COVID, suddenly we have the attention of a lot of people, a lot more of their attention than we did before. Attention of the public, wanting to do something and help. Politicians are listening a lot more. Governments are certainly stepping up with a lot more money. But what we found, so we think that we believe there's this opportunity. And like I said, a bunch of myself and a bunch of colleagues from the private sector who are all kind of in that mid-career, we've decided to try to do something about this. And the not-for-profit vehicle is the way to go. And like I said, we have a business model where we're hoping to include philanthropists and kind of donors as part of our business model in order to start kind of just chipping away at this waiting list, essentially. And hopefully the modular housing solution also will help us to deliver much more quickly than traditional construction methods. But for us, really, COVID, it's like enough, right? Like, what is it going to take? And we're really hoping that this is that moment where we're going to be able to find some really, you talked about, we need new approaches. The old ways of doing things have not been delivering. And if we just continue to rely on them, yeah, we'll, very, very slowly, deliver affordable housing, but not as quickly as we need to. So that's, I believe that is the catalyst, and we just need to get started.
It's interesting. I think I want to just tease out a few of the themes I'm starting to hear across this conversation. I'm hearing things like listening to community, gathering data, but from community, not from outside. I'm hearing that collaboration is the only way to solve these complex problems, that working together, that the importance of the voices of lived experience being loud and clear in the solutions, but also being invited into the solutions. So I feel like it's interesting, Jeannie, you have the youngest organization on this panel. I think the other theme I'm hearing is how some of these long organizations have been around for a longer time continue to innovate and continue to be open to change. And I think all of that is very inspiring. I want to ask a question. You mentioned George Floyd, Jeannie, and I think we're all very aware of the important kind of social justice revolution that's going on in the world right now, and the opportunity it creates for some harder dialogue. And I think it's really sweet, me asking this question as a white leader of a big philanthropic institution, but I think it's an important question for me to be asking. And I'm of course really want to hear your thoughts. So in your opinion, why do not-for-profits and grassroots efforts with BIPOC leadership need to be at the core of driving an equitable recovery, and what support do they need? Who wants to take this one first? Jeffrey, you're leaning in.
I'm trying to hold back, Sharon. I'm making room for other voices, but no. So listen, I started by saying that this country started with a promise of co-development that was never delivered, right? Our country, our laws, our legislations, our processes, our culture, all of it is built on a very Eurocentric model of what it means to build community, to live as families, to support each other. With near complete erasure of all of the very, very long-standing intergenerational Indigenous knowledges about how to do things, how to innovate, right? Our toolbox is incredibly limited. Never mind everybody who came to this country voluntarily or involuntarily bringing their own cultural tools and logics, right? I don't often go back to terms and thoughts and ideas from my graduate schooling days, but I was reminded by somebody that I studied with at Columbia University about this idea of punctuated equilibrium. And that's the idea that big systems are hard to change because they ossify, they build this historical momentum, but every now and then something smashes them, like a global pandemic, and you have this window, this opportunity to build back better, to do things differently. That is right where we are right now. And I think that we have an opportunity to innovate through bringing in different cultural ideas and approaches and tools and practices to really solve problems in new ways. And what do organizations like mine and others need to do that? Not only resources, but power sharing. Equity and diversity is not only about people, it's about processes and ideas and epistemologies and worldviews. What we need is a safe space to start integrating those into the work that we're doing. And we need to be supported to do that through funding and policy decisions and legislations and the rest of it. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to take up the rest of the webinar. Good.
I saw Dwayne nodding quite supportively.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and so well said, Jeffrey. It's hard for me to articulate this without getting a little emotional, right? I mean, lived experience. I've grown up trying to navigate the system without taking offense that I've had to work 10 times harder, etc. But what I feel like happens oftentimes, whenever there's an issue that comes to light, there's a subsequent check that follows. But that check oftentimes, the way I look at it, is a Band-Aid, right? It's not actually getting into the weeds of what is actually going on. You know, we might look at larger issues like gun violence in the city and say, well, we just need to get guns off streets, and money can help that. Let's get more after school programs. That's part of it, yes, but it's really more deep rooted than that. You know, are we looking at jobs? Are we looking at the education system and how that all feeds into the outcomes that we see and that we experience? So for us, in terms of what leaders can do to support us, it's not just financial, but it's also on these other items of expertise, such as you know, governance, HR, IT, you know, some of these, I've been a part of a lot of non-for-profit organizations, and now on the sugarcane side, we're a small team, you know, small but mighty, but we could benefit from additional resources and supports in terms of, you know, our IT system. Are we the most secure? Do we have the infrastructure? Like, if we were to scale up at our current rate, would we then become victims to cyber fraud, etc.? So these are the things that I think we need to look at a bit more, and having diverse voices in those spaces, we'll be able to identify a bit more of the needs for certain communities.
Sharon, I know for us, the work that we want to do, having local community leaders, change makers is part of what we're building is critical. I only know what I know. It's very little, but I can bring my expertise and add that to all the other expertise and experts that we need around the tables, and certainly in the work that we're planning to do, including community and listening, because, you know, kind of it's not a one size fits all. Even, you know, kind of in high priority neighborhoods, it's not like this is exactly what everybody needs. So responding to local needs, and also creating, you know, employment opportunities. So for us, kind of the partnerships with, you know, existing kind of organizations who are already in the communities is a critical part of kind of the work that we want to do as well, as to partner and collaborate. We're not going to parachute in and fix everybody's problems. No, we want to come in and bring our expertise to help solve at least the you know, the housing part of this, the equation.
Yeah, I think just building on what Dwayne said in terms of resources, I think what happens is many times we're, you know, especially Black-led organizations, we're trying to immediately address issues that are right in front of us. And I think the idea is with additional resources, if organizations become sustainable and more stable, we can do the visioning as well, right? And I think that's the most important part, is really the visioning of for looking at the ways in which we want to have relations in our communities, and thinking about the future. We need to also be able to have a stable foundation to do that. So I think that, as Dwayne said, more resources allowed organizations that are Black-led to then really work on the visioning portion, which is really important.
Yes, it is. Candace, I want to make sure you get a chance to weigh in here if you wish.
I think that every point that was brought up here was incredibly valid. Without people of color sitting at the table, there's no way that you can fill the gap of inequality. There's no way, because you don't, you can have a bunch of people at a table that really want to help and want to fix the problem, but if you don't have people telling you what the problems are, what are you throwing the money at, right? So at the end of the day, and it's not just people of color, Black people, Indigenous people, we're not a monolith, right? So you have to have different voices from those communities as well, right? So because someone who comes from an Ethiopian community and someone from a Jamaican community have different issues and have different problems. Someone's from an area in Ontario, an Indigenous area in Ontario, and an Indigenous area in Nova Scotia have different issues. So you need people of color that different voices and different point of views that can really help to stem the problems.
You know, in our last conversation a few weeks ago, two thoughts. I'm just connecting the dots here between what you just said, Candace. One was we were talking about, one seat at the table. That's not what we're talking about, right? To your point, we need many, many seats made available at the table for many diverse perspectives from the various cultural and lived experience backgrounds that people bring to this conversation. And so it isn't just about filling a seat, right? I think that sometimes that's where people go. And I think the idea of a one voice representing all is just, well, it's just not possible and not realistic. I want to get to some questions that are coming in from our audience. So I'm going to ask a first question here, which I'm just reading for the first time here from Jennifer Chan. How might we value and compensate community members for their time and knowledge when founders and organizations don't? Anybody? I'll read that one more time. How might we value and compensate community members for their time and their knowledge when founders and organizations don't? Anyone want to have a go at that?
You're gonna go, Tesfai? You got a wisdom bomb to drop here? Or? I mean, we have community.
I don't know. Sorry.
Go ahead. Please go. Yeah.
No, I don't know if I have necessarily an answer to that, but I will say that oftentimes what happens is that, as Jennifer is really alluding to, is that the expectation is that those from our communities are doing this labor kind of on the side of their table. And it relates back to what we were just saying about resourcing organizations in ways that really fund them in ways that are appropriate for everything that they're doing, right? And you'll see that especially smaller organizations will take on a great deal of work, but with only a portion of that work actually being funded, but understanding the necessity of that work that needs to be done. So I feel that I really feel that sentiment, but I don't know what necessarily we can do as an organization besides, I mean, we really just need to be resourced at the end of the day to be able to support all those that are doing the work.
100%. And I think we work in many different neighborhoods, right? And we have community advisory councils associated with most of our large sites. And, we invite community to come in and share a meal and talk to us about the services they want to develop and how we should be changing. And, I think being able to provide community honorariums, being able to get community from those councils involved in training and education programs. For us, the line between staff and community is really blurred because so many of our staff are community members, and we're always striving to have community members come on as staff, right? So I think it's carving out those pathways to engage people, recognize that their time is valuable and should be compensated. Reciprocity is an inherent value for Indigenous folk, and trying to bring them in to part of the circle. And consultation fatigue is real. When I used to work at the city, I would tell people this as well. Like, everybody wants to consult with community about this, and people get tired, especially in the context of a pandemic. So I think being strategic and not asking questions twice and making sure that we are, not overburdening community around the feedback that we solicit is really important.
Well, and I think Tesfai's comment earlier, there's a big difference between consultation and being a part of a visioning process, right? It's a very, very different engagement and different meaning. Another question, people of color are rarely funded to think. I think this is a good build on what you just said, Jeffrey. When they are funded, they are funded to do or build. What are your thoughts on that reflection?
I'd agree with that
Do you
sentiment.
agree?
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment, mainly because we're not viewed as thinkers. We're not in those spaces. We're not at that proverbial table, right? I think when we're talking about that table, to build on what you were saying, Sharon, I think sometimes people need to step away from their table and go visit another table, right? You might find a different meal on there that you've never even tried before, but now can't live without, right? So it's quite challenging, but I would say the more that we're in these spaces, the more that you hear from Black voices, BIPOC voices, you'll see that we're not only doers, we are thinkers as well, and hopefully that's also evidenced even in this short time that we have this morning with you all.
A last audience question that I want to make room for a last question about what you need. So we gotta get an ask out there. But here's a last question from the audience. The issues of voices comes up frequently. How do we balance addressing a multiplicity of voices, perspectives, with focusing on common goals in order to have an impact? It's a tricky one. I should have read it before I looked at the time. I'll read it one more time. The issues of voice comes up frequently. How do we balance addressing a multiplicity of voices and perspectives with focusing on common goals in order to have impact? It's a complicated one. Maybe an unfair one at the end.
Sharon, I think that, I mean, certainly from the housing perspective, there's so many different housing needs. I think sometimes maybe because politicians, or we think the problem's so big, we just kind of dither and try to come up with the perfect solution that'll make everybody happy. I'm a doer, and at some point you just have to jump in. You just have to kind of, let's say, choose a group or that you're gonna, help and just get the ball rolling. So I understand. I love the comment earlier about consultation fatigue. I can tell you in the affordable housing sphere, there's been enough webinars and studies to say this is a problem. Now we just need to get started. And yeah, I don't think you're going to find a one size fits all. I think groups like ours and other groups, you just have to kind of get started, kind of start with a group and still do all the listening. But yeah, that's a tough one. At least certainly in our field, you can't. If you're just going to wait to find the perfect solution, we're going to keep waiting.
I maybe I'll help with my impression on this question because I really am torn between action and thoughtfulness and listening, and but I do think you can actually do both. The question is, and I think this is what I've heard from this over and over again today, it's who is with you in starting to act. It isn't about a conversation that happens over here about what should happen and then a whole different group of people acting on it, but in fact that shared journey with, frankly, folks that are experiencing the issue in the lead as opposed to others. Would this group agree with that generally?
I think so. I mean, yeah. I mean, like for us, our service model was defined through ceremony, almost 35 years ago by elders and knowledge keepers. They did 4 days of ceremony, they fasted. So we know what we're supposed to be doing. The how is defined by a diverse group of people, and Indigenous diversity has already been touched on, right? So we try to look at the community we're serving, represent that diversity at every level of the organization, ensure that it's sitting at the board level, and then reflect on the how. But the issues have been defined and continue to be refined through community engagement and co-development and leadership. And then it's about ensuring, for us anyhow, that there's enough diversity at the table to innovate and ensure that we, that the how is defined by a broad circle of people.
I am so sorry that we are running out of time. I could continue this conversation for another hour. I know Jeanhy and Jeffrey have to be somewhere at 9 o'clock. So I am going to wrap this up with such warm thanks. And Jeffrey, I'm going to be thinking about this idea of an origin story that started in ceremony. Isn't that a rich example of what we as a society are missing out on in the way we form our plans and activities? And just an enormous thank you, Jeanny, Dwayne, Tesfai, Candace, and Jeffrey, for giving us your time, not only this morning, but in preparation for the discussion today. It has been rich. It could go so much further. For those of you that are with us today, please reach out to these folks if you're interested in learning more about their work. I know they would welcome your connection and your interest and your investment. And you heard today, they're not just looking for money, they're looking for engagement, they're looking for skills, they're looking for partnership. And so please do that. And so my big thank yous, I want to give you a few reminders. Check out torontofoundation.ca, linked. If you haven't read the Fallout Report, gosh, now is the time. We have our next webinar, our last in this series, December 10th. With a much better moderator than me. I'm sure she'll keep things on course today. On 8 to 9 a.m. Please register if you can. We would love to have you back. Please spread the word and invite others to join us. Our Good to Give guide just came out. If you are looking for opportunities to invest in some fantastic hardworking organizations in Toronto, the Good to Give guide is the place to go. Thank you for those of you that are heading out at 9 o'clock with us today. Our conversation is actually going to continue in a more informal way, but the formal part of this segment is over. We're going to move into a conversation about giving circles, but I just wanted to thank again our panelists and our guests for being a part of our Fallout Report conversations, and hope to see you again on December 10th.